Hi, I'm Kristen. Disrupting traditional management consulting through the power of AI technology is not just a movement, it's the heart of our mission. Here at Cultify, we're empowering leaders and employees to take action, but more importantly, we're dedicated to creating work-life cultures that are world-changing. I'm so excited that you decided to join us today to be part of this roundtable discussion as we explore what's trending in HR. Welcome, everyone. Today, we are going to talk about employer branding and that sweet spot between branding, culture, and AI, where they all align to really take organizations to that next level. If you're new to our series, we're here every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern, joined by a panel of subject matter experts and thought leaders. And today, as we're celebrating Women's History Month, I'm excited to have two impressive women in business joining us today, who both have a lot to say on the subject. So I'd love to just introduce them to you right now. So up first, we have Emily Soporsi, owner and lead brand strategist at Root and River. Emily, would you like to say a few words to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I am so pleased to join you this morning and really excited to dig into this conversation with Lisa and Kristen. I spend my days living and breathing around brand and its meaning, its message, digging into the roots of it, and excited to share that passion with you all today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. Excited to hear what you have to say on this topic. We also have Lisa Bice, partner at Culture Curated, joining our panel today. Lisa, would you care to say a few words just as introduction?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And just want to say thank you so much for inviting me to sit at this table and have this amazing conversation that we're about to have. But for everyone, I'm Lisa Bice, and I'm one of three co-founders and principal consultant at Culture Curated. And at Culture Curated, we specialize in designing processes, programs, and really experiences that offer businesses and HR orgs essential expertise in human capital, people, and culture. So we try and really redefine simplicity in a really complex world of people management and craft solutions with precision. So we tailor things for the busy leader and focus and center our efforts by working to understand the business and infusing concepts that best reflect the organization's desired culture. So I am so excited to be a part of this conversation today and share more about what I've learned and experienced over the years, certainly connecting with many different people across the globe. So thank you again for being here and excited to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lisa. Excited to have you with us today as well. And like I mentioned earlier, today we're talking all about employer branding and that connection between brand and culture. And at Culture, I would like to think of it as brand culture fusion, because that's just how interconnected branding and culture really are. So we're going to dive into all of that and more in today's conversation. Just a reminder to those of you who are tuning in with us live today, please make sure to utilize the chat. We want to hear from you. We want to hear what's working in your organizations, what questions you're having. And speaking of questions, please make sure to drop anonymous Q&A questions in that Q&A pop-out. It should be located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I have a ton of questions for Emily and Lisa today, but I know you don't want to just hear from me, so we want to hear from you. So please add those questions as they come up, and I'll do my best to get to as many of them as possible. So please make sure to engage that way. And so now to kick things off, I want to share a few quick stats. Now, I'm not going to go into these too in depth because I want to hear from our panelists. But just to share a little bit of the dialogue that's been floating around this topic in 2024. And so really the focus really is on year-round employer branding. We know there's been a lot of layoffs recently in various sectors. And even if hiring is a top of mind at the moment, maintaining a strong pipeline through strong employer branding is really helpful so that you can quickly pivot during those hiring surges. And of course, this also comes as no surprise to our panelists, I'm sure, but authenticity and connection and brand messaging is more important than ever, with a recent stat highlighting that more than half of U.S. employees say that working for a company that shares their values is really paramount. And this stat was really interesting, with 54% saying they would be willing to take a pay cut for this alignment. So being able to clearly and consistently communicate your mission, vision, and values in your employer branding is critical when it comes to talent management. So I'd love to just dive into this conversation. And Emily, I'd love to kick things off with you. So when it comes to just defining overall employer brands, can you help unpack kind of what it is, why it's important to attracting talent today, and just why are we even having this conversation around this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kristen. So I always want to start out with a level set around what brand is. And at Root and River, we define that as brand is how other people experience what you believe. So two operative words there, experience and belief. And so when you speak about employer brands, it's really about digging deep to understand the root system of that brand, articulate it, and then take the next step, which is to kind of not just enshrine it, but make the translation between what you believe into how you behave, and set organizational standards from the roots up around what you believe, your core values. And most times, a lot of times, employers are thinking about sort of the end result, but we always encourage them to begin with how they are living the brand internally first. So how do the beliefs translate into everyday activities that everyone is invited to engage with? And that's really the first and most critical part of establishing an employer brand, and inviting and be invitational and being engaging with the way the brand is emanating from the inside out. There's also this misconception that brand is like for a department or for the marketing team. And brand is really not a department. It's everyone in the organization engaging in it. So it's not something that comes from the top down. It should be something that is discussed from the very first conversations, employment conversations, HR conversations, as you're beginning to, if you're a job seeker, starting to have that conversation with a potential employer, all the way through to how you are living inside of the organization, and then how you're treating the customers. And so the beliefs level, the behaviors level, and then finally that gives way to a brand experience. But brands that really operate from this way, in this manner, we call it intrinsic branding at Root and River, have greater efficiency, greater engagement, and have that consistency of brand that is felt and experienced internally first and then externally. So I think that's a really critical part of branding that people miss, and that is missing from the conversation. We're usually too fixated on the outcomes and not as focused on how internally we can establish our brand, articulate it, and then begin to live it out inside the doors of the organization.
And I'd love to add to that, because you hit on some things that certainly speak to my mind. Is you're giving it words maybe that are different. So for anyone who's on the call, like, oh, that intrinsic branding sounds a lot like what we would call our employee value proposition, right? So how the internal experience showcases what employees value most out of their working environment. Excuse me. So I love that piece of like, okay, if there's an intrinsic branding, start there first, then you're able to maybe magnify the benefits, right? It's more natural in what the customer experiences, potential candidate experiences, and help take things further. And I would honestly say it's really a competitive advantage in, the global war for talent. And so when you think about how your organization and people in your work are speaking to an employer's brand, it's sending signals and really begins to set expectations for, in the case of a potential candidate, right, what they expect to experience. And so when that message is communicated really well, the candidate begins to visualize what it's like to work in your environment. You can get really excited about that when it's connected to, when there's alignment in values, right? And so the stronger that branding message is, ideally from the inside out, the inside of the organization outward, that could tie to reduced recruiting costs for candidate searches, larger candidate pools of more highly qualified candidates, and ultimately, getting a faster time to fill for bringing qualified candidates into the organization. So lots of upside potential when you can really focus and how you design and be very intentional about building your employer brand, hopefully from the inside out, certainly.
Yeah, definitely. You hit on a word there, Lisa, that we really focus on a lot, which is intentionality. And I think, absolutely in those candidate conversations, people begin to visualize themselves in a culture that is well defined and articulated. And they're also, and this happens unconsciously quite a bit, they're also measuring their own internal set of beliefs against or in alignment with the organization. And so when you have that sense of identification that happens, and the candidate is like, oh, this culture sees me because there is alignment between my set of values and beliefs with a larger organization, that's where you get more dedication and a opportunity to have that individual stay engaged in their work and in the organization sort of more as a whole. Essentially, they believe in the foundations. The more that the organization, the employer can live out the brand consistently, the more likely it is for that employee to continue to give their discretionary creativity and really bring their full self, into their work every day.
Yeah. And Emily, I'd be curious to hear from you, like what's like the typical client experience when they're coming to you saying they want to work on their brand? How often is the story connected to a struggle to hire candidates or to keep candidates, or, just wondering about something must not be connected well? Is that a problem you see often?
Yeah, a lot of times companies are coming to me because they've been an established brand and they love their people. They take pretty good care of them. But there's been a disruption in their market where a better branded competitor is coming in, and they're both disrupting, the potential for business, but also they're disrupting the employment pool as well. And so they're really wanting to dig back in to the foundations of the brand to get clear and sort of update. I always say that like brands are like people, they change over time. They don't typically change drastically, but there are slight shifts. And so I think it's really easy for a healthy company to continue doing what they're doing, serving both their people and their customers, but lose track and have a little bit of disconnection to their beliefs and to their brand. And so they're basically coming in, Lisa, looking for that connection again. How do we get reconnected to our roots? How are we more intentional about that internally? And then how are we expressing that externally? They've lost their way in the language. And as we know, language is so fault for defining culture and for creating a shared sense of purpose. So they've usually lost their way a little bit, and they need to kind of dig back in so they can more effectively articulate what their brand is really all about.
Yeah, really. And, I think we'll talk about it probably a little bit later, but the idea that your brand does evolve over time, right? So the one thing that usually happens is people move on, right? Organization has to make different decisions, and the need to consistently go back to make sure you're doing a health check on what your brand is speaking. And, is it moving further away from how your org is working? Or to what extent is it staying in alignment with that? I think is a really great health check to pop through.
Yeah. They often say things like, we're not telling our story. We've been quietly awesome, which may mean you've just kind of sucked at branding for a little while. And it's beautiful to be humble. A lot of the organizations we work with have a sense of humility, which is gorgeous as a quality and can be really difficult as a brand strategy. So it is a little bit about stepping forward. We always say that branding is really an act of courage, and because it's uncomfortable and it takes bravery to step out and say, this is what we believe, this is what we stand for. But that's really what the current market is calling for. Kristen shared those statistics. People want to understand what their organization is all about. They want to feel aligned. They're willing to take a pay cut to have that alignment. And so I always tell people that don't make it harder for your candidates or for your customers to understand what you believe in. Don't hide those beliefs on the the, nether regions of the website or like wait until onboarding to share them. That's a critical part of the decision-making process for people. So put it forward. And I mean, the most kind of compelling way to think about this is your brand is designed to attract, of course, but it should also be effective at repelling the opportunities that aren't a match, right? It should be a very powerful way for people to go, oh, no, that's not for me. That's not a culture that I don't think I want to apply, or I'm not sure that they're a good match for my business. That's okay. People get a little scared about that, but really effective brands know who they're for, and are the opportunities that are aligned and the opportunities that are not aligned, and they're communicating that really clearly.
I love that. And we talk about at Culturify that your brand is who you are and your culture is your brand in action. And so I think it speaks to everything that you guys are both talking about and just the power of that, and how it is attracting a good brand, employer brand strategy is attracting the right people, and also making sure that, people who are looking for opportunities are like, yeah, that's not quite the right fit. So, I read somewhere that every organization, we have an employer brand, whether we are investing in it or not. So why not take the time to really invest in it and actually make sure it's communicating what you are wanting it to communicate to attract the right people. And I know you guys both mentioned this a little bit and spoke to to the culture aspects, but can we go a little bit deeper into how a company's culture is directly influenced by an employer brand? So if somebody is kind of newer to this conversation, can we talk a little bit more about that connection?
Yeah, I'll pick things off, and then Emily definitely would love to get the benefit of your perspective as well as a brand strategist. We define culture as how things tend to get done in your org. So similar to Culturify, right? So it's your brand in action. And so when you think about that, I really want you to think about like what you see as the consistent and observe patterns of behaviors, decisions, and experiences that are happening within your organizations. So those things that tend to be the path or the way, they're repeatable, right? They're somewhat predictable if you think about that. And I'll confidently say this, like, and enter into a debate with anyone on the subject, that your company's culture and employer brand are like inextricably linked. So anyone who wants to disagree, I'm happy to wade into a challenging conversation, really with the position of, if you disagree that they're not linked, I would argue that your company brand and company culture are probably misaligned, meaning that either the statements and the words that you're giving to your culture and or brand are probably too aspirational. Or if you're building a path to say, it is a little bit aspirational because we're trying to take people with us on this journey, that it's not being backed up with actions that help move people within your organizations towards that aspiration, right? Or honestly, it could just be out of touch, right? And realizing that could be a bold statement to some to make. It's really important that for healthy organizations to call out the need to examine and reflect on your organizational employee experience and customer feedback, right? One great way to learn about what's happening with your company culture and your brand is to get feedback from your employees. It's another layer that you can peel on the onion that gives you a really good indication of how your employees are wading through challenges that they experience, certainly, and how they're given autonomy to make decisions or create an impact, or honestly just follow, right? As some, for example. So, really reflect on if the words that your organization is giving to its brand is connected to the culture. And if there's a misalignment, truly you risk misrepresenting who you are as an organization. But when there is alignment, it builds so much trust with stakeholders. When I say stakeholders, that's employees, it's customers, it's suppliers and vendors, it's community members, right? Everyone that organization engages or interacts with directly and indirectly. Remember, it's this world of social media. You can access so much information, whether it's what you wanted people to see or not, right? The other thing that I think that you can really risk if there's misalignment in both your company culture and employer brand is the experience for new and existing employees. So when employees or prospective employees hear your messaging on your employer brand, you're creating a bit of a psychological contract of sorts. And this is where employees really, it's not in writing, right? It's not their employee contract or their job offer, but this mental contract that says, okay, you set an expectation, you've kind of made a promise about what I can expect in your organization. So imagine when we're in the scenario when a new employee joining the org walks in and has visualized already what it's going to be like working in this org, has assessed the value comparison of do we have real alignment in what we value here, and got really excited that they've checked off some answers that say yes. So it can be damaging when that person walks in and is surprised, unpleasantly maybe, that they're experiencing something different. So we want to be sure that we are maximizing that opportunity to create competitive advantage when those things are very clearly aligned. It means that people are getting what they expected from you, both in the actual offer, obviously, but also in those psychological contracts. And it's setting the stage for what I would call, psychological safety. For they didn't feel like they were tricked. You start on the platform of high trust, right? Going into the organization, which means they're much more inclined to bring more of their whole self to work and also contribute at higher levels when they're doing their work.
Yeah, I completely agree, Lisa. So from a brand perspective, if you represent your brands, that can no longer be aspirational. Brands really need to be rooted in what is true and what is real. And we're throwing words around like beliefs and core values. We define beliefs. In our ecosystem, we call them beliefs instead of core values. So things that are non-negotiable that you would take action to defend. And so what are those things that you're actually willing to live out? And if they're aspirational, then they cannot come alive. And if you are in the early 20th century, there was this opportunity, and there was really the standard was to be more, to think about branding as what other people wanted you to be, and then try to be that. And you can no longer do that because that gap that you're speaking about will be exposed and your brand will be damaged. And it can be exposed on a lot of different levels. It can be exposed by that person's first day and they're like, oh my God, this is not what I thought it was going to be. Or it can be exposed, on a grander scale and really have a lot of brand equity and just damage to the actual business. So that's why this whole practice of intrinsic branding is so critical. You have to brand on who you are. There can be certain aspects that are like, hey, we're going to set a high bar and we know we're about 70% there, but they can't be completely aspirational. You are exposing yourself to risk. And in those scenarios, you're failing the brand test, right? So if you are putting out this idea, of your brand as one thing and it's something else, and then maybe you started that in a conversation, but then they go to your website, and there's nothing there that reflects the conversation. Now the brand is broken, and people just don't have the kind of time or desire to, once it's broken, they're not going to kind of stay with it. They're going to move on to the next opportunity. And so you're really setting yourself up for a lot of risk if you haven't done that deep work to establish the root system, as we call it, and then move forward from there, and having certain aspects that are perhaps more challenging, but are things that as cultural standards, you want to be held accountable for. So having a brand be alive is not nailing it every single day. It's like sometimes going, oh, we fell short on that one, but that's okay. I still want to be held accountable towards that. So in that way, I want to propose the idea that brand, again, it's not fixed. It is alive and growing and not fully aspirational, but rooted in what is really true and something that you want to pursue. And I think there's this other thing you mentioned, messaging. Messaging also needs to be aligned from that set of core beliefs. And it needs to also be pushed out a little bit further than most people push it. Most people are branding around or are messaging around kind of industry standard language, and that doesn't stand out. And it's actually, again, not giving the audience what they want, to understand what your philosophy of the business is. And that's really where messaging needs to move away from just what you do into, hey, this is what we believe. Come join us, because every brand is a movement. And so I think those are some areas that people kind of miss when they're thinking about brand. And those are ways that people expose themselves to damage to their brand.
I love how you talk through the idea that, the accountability, sometimes we get it wrong. I think oftentimes the conversations I end up in are, you're dealing with an employee situation where something went wrong. It doesn't fit with the brand. And what I like to encourage, honestly, managers, it starts, with the human engagement and relationship interaction, right? And I encourage managers, you're human, mistakes can be made, and it's an opportunity to show some ownership, which definitely hits on the cultural experiencing side of your organization. And also about, an opportunity to try again, right? It should be something where you get to practice it, where it's not always done right and well. Certainly we want to minimize those opportunities, and I can go on for days about how we can build in good practice around, creating a space that helps to minimize opportunities for negative effects, knowing that they will come. So I really appreciate that you share this accountability piece to say, hey, we don't always get it right, but let's learn from that. How do we do it differently? I think is where I try and invest a lot of time with leaders to say, hey, as an organization, we can learn from this to do it differently. We don't have to hide from it, right? Or run away from the ugly thing that happened so that it never happens again. We should wade into that so that we know that we're better for our branding and for our employees.
I think that builds trust. I mean, you said it earlier. You're going to build trust more effectively when you say, "Oh, we got this one wrong. I'm so sorry, and here's what we're doing. Here's how we'll be better next time." Rather than, sadly, what happens really often is people just sort of avoid the whole topic, right? But I try to educate our clients that when you're really clear on that, that does give you a barometer to say when you nailed it and when there's still work to be done.
Yep. Totally agree.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I love that. The power of transparency, and it goes back to that authenticity and connection and how we're building that, and just the power of that. I think, Lisa, you mentioned all the external stakeholders. So everybody, it's not just our customers, and it's not just our employees, it's everyone who comes across, who we engage with through pipelines, through conversation. And there's just so much power in that. But I want to jump to our Q&A. We've had a few great questions that are in there. I want to start with the second one that just came in. So how can smaller companies differentiate themselves in the competitive talent market through their employer branding efforts? So Emery, I'm going to kind of toss that one to you because I think you were speaking a lot to this earlier.
Yeah. So number one is to understand and be very clear and articulate about your beliefs, how you're living, the standards that are come out of that. For our clients, we have them uncover and define 5 core beliefs, and then create little mantra standard statements that are how the brand gets lived out every day. And then, obviously messaging is super important as well. So it's this branding is also a layer cake, and people think of it as one thing, whether it's your message or your colors and logo. And it should be rich and layered, and because that way it's going to hold up to conversations and content. So if you're in a smaller organization, you're actually way more efficient because there are less decision makers and there are less people to bring together to uncover that and articulate that. So you have an advantage there. And then it gets into differentiation. And this is really about knowing what you do better than anybody else and getting extremely clear on what those top 3 to 5 things are. And those tend to be in the way that you provide an experience. So I think a lot of times people are trying to differentiate around features, and it's really not as effective. Differentiation goes to how are your audience members going to benefit from how you do things differently. So again, it's the layering there of knowing how you're different, how you provide a specific experience, and then how your audience benefits. And if you can articulate that, as well as have this compelling philosophical message, then you're on your way to differentiation. And I mean, this is repeating myself, but it kind of echoes the idea here, is that consistency is so important. So if you're going to invest in brand, make sure that you have a long-term mindset. Don't be switching your message every year. Check in on your beliefs on a regular basis, but make sure that you're going deep enough that you can sustain the brand that you're moving out with for, 2-3 years for sure. And then do a deeper dive, check in, tweak some things, but have that long-term mindset, which can be a challenge today when there's a lot of pressure to like the next marketing trend comes along. Don't let that set you off course. Continue to present your brand consistently over time. I always say marketing is not rocket science. It's clarity of message delivered consistently over time. So I think that can be really helpful.
Yeah, I love that. I think there's so much truth to that too, because when we're thinking about employer branding, if I ask somebody, what is it like to work here? If you just tell me we think a lot of really great merchandise or products or all great service, great. But what is it really like to work here? What I'm wanting to know is everything that you both are unpacking. And so I think we're just emphasizing that when we're talking about employer branding, it's about how our beliefs are lived long and not day to day. So I think that's really, really powerful, and finding what makes you different and leaning into that while being consistent. I think is so powerful. We had another question that I think is really aligned with this conversation too. So we're talking, especially at Cultivating, we talk a lot about AI technology, how that's changing the game across the board, especially in the world of HR. With this series, What's Trending in HR. So when it comes to AI, how do you see that being able to enhance employer brands over the next year? Does it have any impact? What do you both think?
And I'll say, the use of AI technology is exploding. Like there's so much growth around it. And yes, like it's absolutely being used in recruiting practices and processes. I think a lot of the focus is truly about how do I work faster? How do I take out repetitive tasks? And really, AI is being used as an extension of our people engagement and branding. So I think the key here is when AI is used well, it is truly reflective of the key brand messaging, and allows the user, like maybe they can tell that they're not talking to a human, but it's helping guide some key messaging in the experience when they're visiting your website or trying to apply for a job. Or even internally, as you're going through, a promotion process as a leader, right? There's really a lot of stuff AI can do for you. And I do expect over time, it's really one of the watch out points from an HR perspective, in my humble opinion. There's a lot of discussion around legislation and oversight in particular. So I think you'll only see it more and more. And the key is going to be about how do we use it and leverage it with the right kind of oversight to make sure it's not running in a direction that we didn't intend it to go.
Yeah, I think it goes back to that discussion about intentionality. Like in the age of AI, there will be, and I believe looking forward, a greater desire for the human piece of it too. Like both are expanding, the desire to keep the human element alive. And I think AI as a thought partner, as a, take this and run with it is so powerful, but it's also something where you can see the machine approach and use what the AI generates and then take it back to continue to improve and add your human touch to it. So it's sort of a dance. Especially when it comes to brand, because so much of brand is, how, again, people experience what you believe and how you feel. And it is about conveying that, we as a brand care about what we do. We care about you as a human being. And so I think it is this interplay between using AI and using technology in general. Technology is supposed to, make our lives easier and less complicated. And it's debatable whether that's actually happened or if we've just added complexity. So I think it's about being intentional and mindful about how and when you're using AI and pairing it in a dance with some really thought out foundational ideas about the brand, making sure that those are still coming through in whatever technology that you are implementing in your culture.
Oh, absolutely.
At Cultify, you do this, that's the whole thing, this idea that AI can help convey the mission and values. And so I think that's the dance that you're doing, which is so powerful.
Yeah, exactly. Everything you're talking about, that human technology collaboration. So at Cultify, we are an AI platform, and we talk about our technology as a fused intelligence that blends human experience with the power of AI. And I think, Emily, that's exactly what you're speaking about, right? That we cannot lose that human element. We're always going to need that human element, but we can, to Lisa's point, leverage AI to automate tasks, I love it in terms of big data, right? How it can analyze data, and especially when we think about messaging and campaigns, the ability to analyze data, and that is just more than we could humanly imagine at the individual level, and being able to predict behaviors, predict actions, and be able to match messaging campaigns with your audience wherever they are at the right time, right? Because as we're thinking through different personas that we're trying to recruit, perhaps, the messaging and the timing and the channels that I would reach a Gen Z applicant would be completely different than somebody who is more seasoned in their career. And so being able to lean on AI technology to really enhance that definitely brings that human element, Emily, that you're speaking about, but that automation side of it, Lisa, that can really help move the needle and is really, really powerful. But, it's constantly changing. And so keeping up with all of these things can be somewhat of a challenge. Well, I'd love to jump back a little bit, and all of these are intertwined. But we're talking a lot about, the connection between branding and culture. But when we're talking about, okay, well, I understand that. How do I make my organization a more desirable place to work? What does that look like? What are some strategies that you both have seen that are working well, particularly in right now when things are so constantly changing and there is AI technology at the conversation? What does it look like? How can we begin to really create a culture that is a desirable place to work that represents our brand values?
I can think of a few things that I kind of anchor on when working with clients or partnering with a business. And the first one that I always recommend is really taking the time to review your company culture through the lens of your full employee life cycle. All right. So what that means is spending time to ensure that your organizational culture, you can pick up and have experiences at every step of the way in that employee life cycle. I call it threading the needle, ensuring that you have both alignment and connection, right? So I think that probably speaks really well to Emily's concept of like this intrinsic, right, brand that you're developing that people can experience, whether they're internally or external to the organization. But so that you think about your processes, and I love the small company question. And so it reminds me that small companies can do this too. It doesn't have to be like this full-blown thing, because it builds over time and you should be able to add and layer to it. But think about your internal processes, your organizational design and structures, the tools and systems that your employees have access and ability to use, your onboarding experience, how you train both your individual contributors and your managers and leaders, right? All of performance management, process development, compensation and benefits, like truly, there's an opportunity to make sure that your company culture is, again, you're creating the environment for your company culture to show up the way that your people highly value and the way that you want to design it. And so that's the the sweet spot, if I will, that really says, okay, we're doing a thorough health check to make sure it is deeply embedded. And what you'll find oftentimes is a lot of organizations do it really well in one area. Maybe it's an onboarding, but they have an opportunity to really figure out how to unthread the needle on a performance management system. What are we rewarding? Which ties to my second piece of advice that I think is a really key strategy. So we think about business results, and everyone has KPIs or performance measures that we're setting goals against and working towards. And oftentimes organizations focus on that as the primary, what gets done. I would challenge an organization to really think about making sure that there's accountability to how it gets done, and that the how is reflective of the organizational cultural standard that you are setting as an expectation. I think that really gives a nice blend to, again, create accountability, but keep the culture healthy and aligned to what the words that you're speaking to it. And then the third thing that I think can be really important and an opportunity, again, this is something that I think can scale. And I can see, I've worked with some organizations that do have the larger you get, the harder it is to figure out how to make it happen. But it's a good challenge to wade into and figure out how might we be able to make this happen. But it's to create opportunities for employees to engage in activities that are connected to your culture. So, for example, in your brand. So identifying aligned and worthy causes, right? And making sure that you have an environment where people can participate, volunteer, engage, and share, right? So again, if I think about we're creating an environment for people to be able to do things that they value, which is tied to what the company values. And that environment is kind of like creating a really great space for good things to happen. Maybe not all the time, but more likely than not. And so we know that that as humans, when we experience something that's on the extreme ends, right, whether it's really positive or really negative, we're more likely to share that story. So we want to create the environment where we believe we're allowing for more space for more positive things to happen, and it's extending the share and the reach of the storytelling for your work culture and your brand. And so it's like getting really thoughtful, again, intentional, I think is a word that we continue to use here, around how do you create space to make those things happen. So those are the three that I think are really important strategies for creating a desirable workplace, obviously to keep talent, but also to help you attract and engage folks externally as well.
Yeah, you made a lot of great points there, Lisa. I think, expectations, clear expectation setting, not just in the what, as you said, but in the how you're doing it, is critical. And then recognizing that. So what we see with our clients is when they take their brand standards and they, on a regular basis, not necessarily on it doesn't have to be, a dinner or a special event or a formal award, but during regular meetings, if they're saying, you know what, you lived out the brand this week in this, and encouraging that between members of the teams, so that we get to a place where it's not just leadership calling people, like recognizing, but it's colleagues saying, hey, I saw you do that. That's in alignment with the brand. And then always tying that back to like the deeper meaning, whether it's aligning with mission or it's aligning with a value or it's aligning with serving of the ideal audience. I also think, people today, they want to feel cared for. I think work is becoming a place, and we see this reflected in the Edelman Trust Barometer. We see this reflected, in some of the work that Gallup has done in the last few years. We imagine we want our workplaces to be a place of psychological safety, as Lisa mentioned earlier. We want our employers to help us protect our well-being and our time. We're all waging a war against distraction. And so I think workplaces that understand that and can provide space and structure so that it allows you to actually do your work, like literally just setting, whether it's no meeting days or no email days or project time. I was just listening to a conversation, on Adam Grant's podcast. regarding just creating that space for people to be allowed to set aside the noise of the world and really focus on meaningful work. That helps to create, that helps to just give people room to breathe. They'll feel more satisfied in their work if they're not constantly dealing with distraction. So maybe that means shutting down Slack for a couple hours and letting everyone just kind of do their thing. So I think that organizations that understand the demands that their people are under and are making, creating some solace within the work environment are doing something that is really desired.
That, and at Culture Fair we talk a lot about work-life culture, where we say that your organizational culture is that perfect balance between your work and your life, right? Because we're bringing our holistic selves to the office these days. We don't just shut off our life experiences when we clock in at 9 to 5. That just doesn't happen anymore. And the technology that's out there does make it so much easier to engage and bring your team together, whether they're hybrid, whether they're remote, whether they're in office. And so, as you guys are talking, I'm thinking immediately about, internal social feeds that allow people to connect and share life updates, and to both of your points about that peer recognition, and even with technology now being able to recommend different ways of acknowledgement and rewarding that is personalized to the people. Things like employee resource groups that are able to be conducted for your entire team globally. So there's so many ways that technology can make this easier to help bring people together and really help to educate and encourage on what those brand values are, to really help them take place and cultivate them in your culture. And I think, Emily, to your point, that the reality of being able to take on some of the feedback, that goes such a long way, right? When me as an employee feel like I'm being heard, my team cares about me, leadership cares. I think that's really, really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, having somebody at work who cares about you your well-being as a human being is one of the top desires, and it's one of the things that's also people feel is missing, right? When we look at these disengagement studies, having somebody who cares about you at work, or knowing that leadership knows who you are, knows your name. Like, these are not complex things. And I think, again, sometimes we're looking at the end result. We're looking for the outcome. We want our brand to be this or that. And we're not starting close enough to ourselves to be able to just start there and create that. Like at Root and River, one of our core values is in love. And the way we live that out, our standard is love on them where they're at. So we really try to make our clients feel loved. If they have a setback, if they're questioning a piece of the messaging, we're like, okay, let's take a pause. Let's look at it. I think a lot of loving on people is giving them room. And in a very busy, very demanding world that's asking a lot of all of us, I consider that to be an act of love. So just an example.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so powerful. And, when we think about the power these small little changes can have on the impact of the experience of the employee, when an employee speaks about an organization's culture, that is so much more powerful oftentimes than the CEO. So these little things that you can do to really make a difference for the individual, when they relay that externally or even internally, that's going to be so much more powerful than if it's coming just from leadership. Now, we want it to come from leadership, of course, but there's so much more power, especially when you think about the ripple effect and leveraging social media and the virality of that. I think that's really, really powerful to think about. Now, I know we're running up on some time, so I want to kind of just throw out the big picture question for both of you. So 2 different things we can answer. I'll leave it up to you guys. Talking about measuring employer brand success. What does that look like? How do we measure that? And or looking ahead, future trends. So what should people be looking at when we think about employer branding for the rest of 2024, going into 2025 and beyond?
I love both of these topics, and apologies, I've had some audio issues, so hopefully everybody can hear me okay. I've got my fancy headset on. Okay, awesome. So I kind of want to talk to both, so I'm going to try and talk fast, and certainly want to make sure we give Emily an opportunity to share her insights as well. So just a couple of quick things for measurement. audit. You kind of heard it earlier, audit against your brand and make sure that it's still aligned. And you can do this audit through engagement surveys, pulse checking, culture surveys, create the space to really make sure that you are checking in on your brand for alignment. I'm going to tell you to listen to customer feedback. Those are some of the best insights you can gather. It'll help you understand what's happening with your branding. And then really try and focus on narrowing in your messaging. So Emily might have mentioned the top 3 or 5 key messages that you want to share as your brand, and then really leveraging technology, even AI, to maximize the reach and consistency of those key messages with different touch points in the community. But it's also equipping your internal people for storytelling, right? And so when you embed it in training, when they're having the consistent experience, all of those things really begin to translate. And again, you're maximizing you're exponentially maximizing your reach for that brand story. I'll pause there, but I hope we have time to talk about the future.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I would just add that one metric that we like to use is your audience using your language back at you, right? So that is the sign that you've embodied your brand and that you've committed to your brand message, right? Your message should be one kind of umbrella idea that is simple, unexpected, and emotional. That's our rubric for message. And then obviously then we build that layer cake of what you do, your differentiators. But if you speak that language consistently, your audience should be saying it back to you. And that can be in referrals, that can be in literal like post language that they're using to talk about your company. That's when you know that you have not just done an exercise around brand, but actually tapped into the true essence and the spirit of the brand. And then I would also just say that, again, it's perhaps more of a qualitative metric, but is the brand alive for you? Does it make you emotional when you're talking about it? So start there. All of us can do that, whether you're in leadership or not. And if it's off, talk to someone about that or dig a little bit deeper. Don't just say, oh, well, we won't focus on that one. Get in touch. And again, in the age of AI, make sure that you're not putting aside the personal touches and those personal moments that you can make. I think those are 3 things that you can really look to this year and bring those to life in your brand.
Well, that I think that's so powerful when we think about it. Doesn't sound like your people just memorize something, right? But they're able to personalize it and they're saying it in a way that makes sense to them, and maybe leaning into some of those values that may align more to one generation than the other. And being able to take note of those and then adapt your messaging to really engage those different audiences. I think there's so much we can learn from hearing our people speak back our messaging to us. And so really just listening. But, as Lisa said, an easy way to do that, pulse surveys, paying attention to what's happening in that chat, that social feed internally. What are people saying? How are they saying it? What's resonating and why, I think is really, really powerful. And I do want to just tap into that last question. Thinking ahead, Lisa, I know you had a few more thoughts on as we look to the future, what should we be keeping an eye out for? Anything you would like to share when you think about coming future trends for employer branding?
I think in the interest of, I have 2, but in the interest of time, I'll hit to one, which I think is really key for leaders within organizations and then HR practitioners, is tying it back to AI. That's what the conversation piece is. And we are just now, honestly, like in the last 6 months, starting to see legislation that's providing some insight and direction, some guidance even on how to ensure not all AI is created equally, right? And one of the beautiful things that I love about Cultivating's platform and the messaging is really about blending this human engagement with, this ability to powerfully create algorithms that make recommendations based on the data that it's running through its system, right? And so the blending is what is so important. And we're starting to see legislation that starts to speak to that, give words to what accountability looks like. So as leaders and HR practitioners, it's key, it's really going to be key that you get highly engaged and really deeply evaluate what is your AI generating for you, not just in brand making or branding, but also in recommendation making. So we want to really get clear on what oversight and accountability looks like for organizations, in particular when it comes to making employment decisions. So we want to make sure that everyone's able to take advantage of the beauty of AI, but use it responsibly. And so you want to make sure that your AI, what it's doing is it's like using predictive analytics, right, to generate recommendations for candidate success, culture fit, right, performance assessment for behavioral assessments. And so all those are decision points that lead to employment decisions, just using recruiting as an example. And so we want to make sure that in those predictive analytics, for example, that the data that AI is using is not unintentionally built with bias, right? And therefore bias is being generated in its recommendations. And so it's an example of how if we don't maintain that human element of discernment and interaction, asking questions, validation, where you don't want to leave AI unchecked. So make sure, as like New York City just came out with legislation, I think the EU just came out with like the AIA, Artificial Intelligence Act, and things are really starting to work itself into rolling out for actions. And I think there's several other jurisdictions that are building similar legislation and bills. So pay attention, act responsibly. It is definitely a powerful tool, and I think we'll all be using it or experiencing it. We just want to make sure that we are using it without bias and are creating additional legal risk and employer branding and culture risk to us. So that's my biggest takeaway.
Yeah, really. Also, Lisa, I want to go in a different direction. I'm seeing more and more of a trend of employers and companies really getting focused on their ideal audience, knowing who you are for and who is for you. So we often say at Root and River that your audience are not the people who you're looking for, they're the people who are looking for you. And it's about, and I've seen this kind of trend just rise over the last couple of years. For organizations, knowing that, embracing the idea that they're not for everyone, and but that there are for a certain aligned opportunities. So I think, as you can buy anything from anyone, anywhere, anytime, and what makes you truly different is knowing what you do, what you believe in, and then also how you can best serve. And so I think the desire for companies to be really specialists and not fall into that trap of trying to be all things to everyone is something that's only going to grow over time. So I think that's definitely a trend that I'm seeing quite a bit, and definitely can use that clarity of who you are and who you're for and who's for you and plug that into technology. But at its core, it's about doing some self-reflection and some looking at the data to understand who you best serve and really working within that lane.
Yeah, I love that. I think, just refining that employee value proposition. What is that makes you different? What are you promising to your people? And how promises that you can actually live up to and put into action. And then, Lisa, to your point, yes, the changing of technology is so fast. How do we keep up? But really leaning into that, like we said here at Cultify, that fused intelligence, human experience with the power of AI. We talk a lot about how, there is some fear around, is AI going to take my job? And we talk a lot about how it's not here to take your job, but take your job to the next level. And so helping educate our teams and our people at every level of our organization. So what does that look like for me to leverage AI in my current role to take my job to the next level? And I think that's something that is really exciting as we talk about and look to the future as well, even with all the legislations and changes, which are good. And how do we really just leverage that for our people, building those cultures that people want to be a part of, that represent our brand well. So there's, I know we just scratched the surface. We could be here so much longer talking about this, but thank you both so much for being here and sharing your experiences. I really appreciate that. And to everyone who's tuning in live, thank you for being here. At Cultify, we talked a lot about different challenges, about building cultures, enhancing your employer branding, and leveraging AI. And we have a lot of solutions to help you guys do that. So if you would like to discuss any of the challenges that you're experiencing in any of those areas, we would love to connect. Please feel free to reach out, info@cultify.com, to connect with a member of our team, and we can share a little bit more about how we can help you move the needle and enhance your brand and empower your people in a really powerful way in 2024. And again, just thank you, Lisa and Emily. We want to drop your contact information into the chat. We really, part of why we do this is we want to help build a community of leaders and HR leaders. And so those, if anyone wanted to reach out with you, they'll have your contact details in the chat. But thank you so much for both of you for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa and Kristen. It's been so fun.
I agree. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed today's conversation.
Same here. Same here. And then come up, as I said, we are here every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern. And next week, we'll be back talking about leadership development, performance management, and AI. So if you're looking to explore how AI can help sharpen your leadership development efforts to boost engagement and retention, you do not want to miss this conversation coming up next week. But that's all we have for you guys today. Thank you again for being here, and we will see you all next time.